Good morning, everyone. My name is Victor Kamenker, and I am the director of the Social, Humanitarian, and Cultural Committee. And this is the HMUN India webinar on rules of procedure for the conference. Can everyone hear me all right? Can you guys type in the chat if you can't hear me or anything? All right, seeing as I don't see anything in the chat that says you can't hear me, I'll take it that people can hear me all right. So I'm going to try to make this an interactive webinar so that people don't get bored of listening to rules of procedure for the next hour or so. So we're going to start off with a quick poll. So if you give me just 1 second, I'm going to type my pre-made questions into the system, and you guys can vote on what you think the correct answer is. All right. So if you guys could take a look at the poll that I just started, what percentage of the committee's membership must be present in order to open debate? In other words, what is a quorum? So we are here now. Let's pretend that we're in committee session. I would like to know if we have, say, 100 delegates attending this webinar, which we don't, but potentially we might. What percentage of those delegates need to be present in the committee room, or let's say watching the webinar, in order for us to open debate? So I have 3 votes so far for 35%. 1 vote for 15%, 2 votes for 40%. I'll give you guys, let's say, another 30 seconds or so. Let me pull out my timer. And then we'll conclude the vote and see how people have voted. So you have about 30 seconds left to vote if you'd like to. And then we'll get underway. Let's see. All right, so about 10 more seconds left to vote. Alrighty, I'm going to stop the polling there. So I think you guys should be able to see the results. Interestingly enough, only one person answered correctly. Whoever said that it's 25%, that was correct. A quorum is 1/4 of the committee membership. So 1/4 of the committee's registered delegates must be present in order for a committee session and debate to begin. This is actually assumed in HMUN Rules of Procedure. We never go out and explicitly count that 1/4 of the committee membership is there. We just assume that 1/4 is present, and we motion to begin debate. If someone in the delegates feels that there is not 1/4 of the membership present, though, they can motion to have the director count how many people are there and determine if a quorum is present. So now I'd like to launch into a more substantive review of how committee sessions are run at HMUN India and HMUN in general, and how that might be different from other conferences and Model United Nations simulations that you've attended before. So we'll do a quick run through of that. Then we'll go over sort of specifics of HMUN rules and the authority of our director and moderators, which is slightly different, again, to other conferences. And then we'll just cover some personal pet peeves of mine, which are, I think, important notes that all directors would probably agree with. If at any time you guys have questions, feel free to chat them to me, and I'll do my best to respond to them or try to work them into the format that I'm doing. And again, if you can't hear me or something like that, also please type it in the chat, and I'll try to troubleshoot on the go. I've never used this system before, so it's a learning experience for everyone. So one of the best things that I recommend doing, and I don't know if any of you watched the other Rules of Procedure webinar, is to go through the HMUN India Guide to Delegate Preparation. That has a Rules of Procedure section in it, and it's incredibly useful. I know that all of the directors have studied it for long periods of time because it goes in depth about all the specificities of HMUN India Rules of Procedure. And if you really want to know the rules well, I recommend reading that over and over again before conference starts. I know I will be for sure. So I'm not going to go through every single rule there. Obviously, some of them are more general and obvious, such as the fact that English is the official working language of the conference. We don't really need to discuss that. But I just want to go over general conference flow. So for HMUN India, most of our committees are single topic committees, which means that we will be able to skip over the real sort of first general thing that happens in committee session, which is usually setting the agenda. Usually, or oftentimes, committees will have a topic A and a topic B, and so your first order of business will be to determine as a body whether you want to debate topic A or topic B. Again, given that most of the committees at HMUN India, including my committee, SOCHUM, have only one topic, we don't need to set an agenda. The agenda is set automatically. So the first thing that should happen after a director takes roll call in a committee session is there needs to be a motion to open debate. So a delegate will motion, usually the motion passes because people want to get to debating, and we will open a general speakers list, GSL. And so the general speakers list is the formal debate that occurs at conference. Directors usually have their own preference of how they add people to the speakers list. Either delegates will send up notes to the dais with their country name saying, I would like to be added to the speakers list. Sometimes at the very beginning of a committee session, a director might just have delegates raise their placards and call on people really quickly one by one and have the assistant directors just start making a list like that. Regardless, the general speakers list is a forum for delegates to air any sort of comments, feedback, questions that they might have for the rest of the body about the given topic. For example, my topic for the Social, Humanitarian, and Cultural Committee this year is violence against journalists and journalistic freedoms worldwide. So if I opened up the speakers list on day one of conference, a delegate might ask to be added to the speakers list, and at that time, have a minute to speak about his or her nation's positions on freedom of the press, or his or her nation's positions on what to do to combat violence against journalists. Once you've had a few speakers on the general speakers list, it is usually helpful to delve into sort of more specific or concrete areas of debate, and for that we have two other mediums, which are moderated and unmoderated caucuses. So generally, I as a director will want to hear from sort of a broad variety of nations from different geographic areas of the world before launching into a moderated caucus from the speakers list, but it varies by committee, and so sometimes directors might rule motions for a moderated or unmoderated caucus in order or out of order depending on sort of the way that debate on the general speakers list has taken. Regardless, after you motion for a moderated caucus is a specific time set aside for discussion of a topic within the more general topic of the committee's discussion. So, say you're discussing violence against journalists, a more specific or nuanced area to discuss might be specific threats facing journalists this year. Or specific ways that we can protect journalists in war zones. So very sort of concrete things. So you'll motion for a moderated caucus, you'll give a speaking time, you'll give a total time, you'll give the topic of the moderated caucus, and then it'll be voted upon. And so if it passes, you launch into the moderated caucus. The delegate who motioned for it is generally the default speaker, and then the director solicits other speakers for the moderated caucus. One important thing to note is that no disruption from the speakers list, be it a moderated caucus or an unmoderated caucus, can be longer than 20 minutes. This is just a general rule of procedure at HMUN India. So say you motion for a 10-minute moderated caucus, and it's a really good discussion, it's a really heated discussion, and then you want to continue with it after 10 speakers have gone, you can motion to prolong that moderated caucus, but it can't be a motion to prolong it more than 10 minutes. because the total time of any given caucus cannot be more than 20 minutes. So that's, I think, an important distinction that we have at HMUN India that delegates sometimes forget. We'll have people motioning for 25 or 30-minute unmoderated caucuses, which is, first of all, against our rules of procedure, and in my personal opinion, dilatory, because there's no need for such a long unmoderated caucus. And so that's sort of the gist of the speaking and debating part of committee session. An unmoderated caucus is essentially, for those of you who don't know, just an opportunity for delegates to informally gather and talk about their ideas, or start drafting up written documents, or go meet with the dais if they have any questions for the director or assistant directors. And that is an opportunity also for delegates to work on laptops or things like that, if they have those, to draft up working papers or draft resolutions. Generally, HMUN India Rules of Procedure prohibit any sorts of electronics in committee session, but the one exception to that rule is during unmoderated caucus. They are allowed. You should note, all of you though, however, that laptops are also at the discretion of the director. So if the director feels that even during an unmoderated caucus, laptops are a distraction and are not contributing to furthering debate and what is going on in the committee room, directors can rule that laptops are not allowed at any time. And that decision is not negotiable. So now I want to switch and talk about the written aspects of debate, so sort of the documents that you're expected to produce in your committee session. So the first thing that we should talk about is working papers. Working papers are a chance for delegates in a committee to solicit ideas from their partners and from other members of the committee, and to make their ideas, their preliminary ideas, known. So working papers do not have to follow any sort of format or structure. They can just be, they can even be bullet points if you want. They don't have to be full sentences, and it's very informal. Think of it as a just a scribble of your ideas, even though it should be legible and can even be typed up. But working papers do not require any signatories, which means they're just submitted to the director for approval by whoever wrote one, and they won't be distributed to the whole committee unless the director approves it. So if, I always say to my delegates, it's not, sorry, I just need to plug in my laptop. It's not vital to submit a working paper to do well in committee, to get a draft resolution passed, or anything like that. You absolutely do not need to submit a working paper. It's just a chance for you to chat with other delegates and see what other people are thinking about and get your ideas out there. As a result, generally directors will limit the number of working papers that they accept, depending on the size of the committee and sort of the way committee has been flowing. So for example, if a delegate says, or a director rather, says, I'm not accepting more than 5 or 6 working papers, and then 12 different delegates or 12 different groups of delegates submit working papers, the director is only going to accept the 5 or the 6, whatever he or she decided. And so, it's not something that you should be upset about if your working paper gets rejected by the director, if it doesn't get distributed to the committee. It just means that the director wants to have a broad swath of ideas circulating, and perhaps, 2 groups had similar working papers, and the director just arbitrarily chose one for circulation. Again, as a reminder, working papers do not need signatories. If there are signatories on a working paper, a director will always strike them and will not include them when the paper is printed. And one other thing is, delegates should never refer to a working paper if it has not been approved and distributed. So you cannot get up on the general speakers list and give a speech saying, the working paper submitted by Afghanistan and Russia suggests X, Y, and Z. Because if the working paper has not been approved, it might not be approved by the director, and so then it's not an official document of the committee, and it can't be referred to as such. And the same thing goes for draft resolutions. You cannot refer to a draft resolution unless it has been introduced. So that's another difference. Working papers can be referred to if they have been approved. Draft resolutions can be referred to if they've been introduced, and I will go through that process in just a moment. So draft resolution is ultimately the document that we're working towards together as a committee. We want to reach some sort of resolution on a topic, and we can only reach one resolution per committee. That is HMUN India policy. We do not accept more than one resolution. So the first resolution that a committee passes is the resolution that that committee has come to. Keep in mind, it is not necessary to come to a resolution. I have run committees before that don't come to a resolution, and we end conference without a resolution. So it happens. So for draft resolutions, they do follow a certain format, which is also available in the Guide to Delegate Preparation. I believe there is a sample draft resolution in there. And they should have an alphabetized list of signatories at the top. Now, a signatory is different to a sponsor. This is something else you should note. Sponsors do not exist in HMUN India Rules of Procedure. If we see sponsors on draft resolutions, we'll delete them. Signatories just means that you want to see the draft resolution debated, and you don't necessarily agree with what it says, but it just means you want to see it in the committee. So I'm just looking here in the Rules of Procedure. Officially, a resolution needs to have 25 signatories if it's in the General Assembly, 8 signatories if it's in the Economic and Social Council, or 5 members in the Security Council or Historical Security Council. So just, again, it means that you want to see it debated. It doesn't necessarily mean you agree with it. So once you've garnered the proper number of signatories, and they're alphabetized at the top, if they're not alphabetized, some directors, myself included, will send it back to you and ask you to reformat it unless it's alphabetized, until it's alphabetized, rather. And it follows the proper format of having preambulatory clauses and then working clauses in the body of the text. Once that's been submitted to the director and the director has read through it and approved it, then it can be introduced to the committee. Generally, directors decide how to work introductions. I will usually suspend rules of procedure temporarily for an introduction and allow 3 or 4, depending on the size of the committee, of the delegates to come up and have a couple minutes to explain the resolution, and then a couple minutes for questions and answers. Some directors choose to do this differently. So your director will explain in depth in your specific committees how he or she would like resolutions to be introduced. But that's one of the formats, and that's a pretty common format, is just to suspend rules of procedure temporarily and have a short intro speech and then question and answer sessions following that. And so after it's been introduced, it can officially be referred to on the general speakers list or in any moderated or unmoderated caucuses as an official draft resolution. Now, something I should note is just because you submitted a draft resolution for approval to the director does not necessarily mean that it will be approved. Sometimes the director may send it back to you with suggested changes and say, unless this is changed, I will not approve this. Sometimes the director will flat out reject it. That happens pretty rarely. We don't like to reject people's draft resolutions. But oftentimes I will suggest for delegates to either make some substantive changes, or perhaps if there's, again, if there's 5 draft resolutions submitted, but I'm only accepting 3, maybe I'll advise 2 groups to merge together and make a bigger, more comprehensive draft resolution. So now let's talk about how we treat draft resolutions once they're submitted. Once they're submitted and introduced, we return to a general, so if we return to formal debate, we can have a general speakers list, you can have moderated caucuses to discuss the draft resolutions. At a certain point, directors will start accepting amendments to draft resolutions. So for amendments to be introduced, they have to have at least 12 signatories in the General Assembly, 4 in the ECOSOC, or 3 in the Security Council or Historical Security Council. And so again, amendments follow a pretty similar procedure to draft resolutions. They'll be submitted to the director. If the director approves them, they will be allowed to be introduced to the floor. And the way I introduce them usually is I will actually take a list of all of the amendments I've approved, suspend rules of procedure temporarily, and read them all out for delegates, or project them onto a display if that's available. And so what can happen then is delegates can motion to to vote upon the amendments to see whether they'll be incorporated into the resolutions or not. And then we have speakers for and speakers against, and they sort of give their ideas, and then we vote about the resolution. Right now, I'm going to pause and make sure you're all engaged, and I'm going to do another poll if I can figure out how to do this. Let's see, hide results, create a new poll. There we go. Just one moment. So this one's easy. This one's a true false. So go ahead. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds or so, 45 seconds maybe. Go ahead and vote on that. So it's 2/3 of the committee's present membership must vote yes for an amendment to be added to a resolution. Also, I don't know why it's saying that it's question number 4. It's not. It's question number 2. But you guys have about 45 more seconds left to vote. Again, it's 2/3 of the committee's membership must vote yes for an amendment to be added to a resolution. Okay, about 30 seconds left. About 5 seconds left. Alrighty, I'm going to stop polling. Okay, so this was actually a very tricky question. It was not a trick question, but it was a tricky question. And most of you, 87% of you, were wrong. So 2/3 majority is only required in HMUN India Rules of Procedure for procedural motions. Whereas for substantive motions, a simple majority is required. So that's half plus 1 of the committee membership, so about 51%. And the way it works with amendments is once you have the 2 speakers lists, one for an amendment, one against an amendment, someone can then motion to close debate on an amendment. We'll have 2 speakers against the closure of debate. Then you need a 2/3 majority to close debate because that is a procedural motion. So in that regards, you do need 2/3 majority, but that's to close debate on an amendment. After you have voted to close debate on an amendment, it is a substantive vote as to whether the amendment is added to the draft resolution. As it's a substantive vote, you only need 51%, or a simple majority of the committee to vote in favor. So that was a trick, but you guys did all right. I was expecting a little bit better. And again, if you guys have any questions about any of this, feel free to throw them into the chat box. I'll do a Q&A at the end. I'll leave ample time for questions, but I'm still going to keep working through right now. Alrighty. So 2 other things that I want to mention, I won't go into them too in-depthly, is after amendments have been added or not added to a resolution, at least voted on, it's in some time in order to motion to close debate. Again, in order for a motion to close debate, you have 2 speakers against closing debate. And then you need a 2/3 majority to close debate since it's a procedural motion, and everyone must vote either yes or no in a procedural motion. And then you move into voting procedure. Generally, if you move into voting procedure, are we going to pass this amendment or not? Or sorry, this resolution or not? But there are 2 things that can go before that. And sometimes they will happen in a committee, sometimes they will not. They're not mandatory, but I just want to make sure people are aware of them. So the first thing that can happen is division of the question. So if a draft resolution, say you're a country and there's a draft resolution that you really like, but there are one or two clauses in the draft resolution that you don't agree with, that you think are just awful and should not be in there. You can motion to divide the question. And what that means is that you can motion to take those two clauses out of the resolution, and people can vote on that. And if those two clauses are voted to be taken out, or separated rather, not taken out, separated. And so you vote on the two clauses separately, and then you vote on the rest of the resolution, and whatever passes, passes. And so that's dealt with like an amendment. Again, you'll need, actually, no, you don't need a 2/3 majority. Since it's a substantive vote, you need a simple majority to vote to decide to divide the question. We then take proposals on how to divide the question. So you can say, I don't like operative clause number 5. I would motion to separate out operative clause 5 from the rest of the draft resolution. And once I've received as a director all of the suggestions for how to separate a resolution, we vote on them in the order from most destructive to least destructive. One thing to note with dividing the question is you cannot separate out preambulatory clauses. So if you do not like a preambulatory clause, that's one of the first clauses at the draft resolution. So understanding X, bearing in mind Y, taking into consideration Z, you can't take those out. You can only take out the operative clauses, which are numbered. So suggests to do A, encourages to do B, etc. And the other thing I'd like to make people aware of is reordering of resolutions. So resolutions are generally voted on in the order in which they were introduced. So, say we have a resolution that was submitted by the United States and Russia, that's going to call it A. Resolution that was submitted by People's Republic of China, that's going to be resolution B. And a resolution that was submitted by Venezuela, let's call it resolution C. Because of the way the HMUN rules of procedure are structured, we only pass one resolution per committee, if anything, at most one. So either 0 or 1 resolutions. So say I'm China and my resolution is resolution B, and I'm really worried that resolution A has a good chance of passing, but I want my resolution to be voted on first. I can motion to reorder the resolutions to be voted upon in the order BAC or BCA instead of ABC. So that can also be done, and that motion actually takes precedence over the motion to divide a question. So if someone motions to divide a question and someone motions to reorder the resolutions, I would entertain the motion to reorder the resolutions first. And if that passes, we then vote on them in the new order. So BAC or BCA. And if China, for example, in my example, played its cards right, and resolution B were voted on first, and resolution B got a simple majority, resolution B would be the binding or passing resolution in our committee, and resolutions A and C would not be voted on because we only pass maximum 1 resolution per committee at HMUN India. So that is pretty much all I wanted to say about walking through roughly how committee session runs. Right now I'm going to switch to just talking about a general overview of the rules and the director's authority, and then we'll go over some important notes. But before that, I just want to take a look at my questions. Okay, I'll do some more questions in a little while. So overall, why do we have rules of procedure for HMUN India or for any Model United Nations conference for that matter? There are many competing opinions and viewpoints. In fact, there's about 195 of them in any given General Assembly. And as a result, there needs to be some sort of decorum and a level of empathy and respect for fellow delegates and for the dais. So as a result, we have a codified rules of procedure that we expect everyone to abide by, and that your directors are expected to abide by as well. And that way we sort of ensure that everything runs smoothly, that everyone is on the same page about how things will be running, and that no one feels slighted or offended if, by other delegates, because everyone should be adhering to the rules. In particular, I want to talk about the director's authority. So the director at HMUN India also, for most of the time, will probably serve as your moderator and be guiding debate and taking motions and points. And this makes him or her the most powerful person in that room with regards to the way committee is flowing. His or her decisions are final, and in some cases they are subject to a point of order. However, because the moderator and director is the same person at HMUN India, the director does have final say. So even if the committee, votes and says, the director is doing something wrong, the director still has the authority to overrule that. And in some cases, that's good because the director can also modify rules of procedure to better tailor fit the committee. For example, as I was saying earlier, generally when I have delegates introducing their draft resolutions, I will suspend rules of procedure. Just because that means we can be a little bit less formal, and it's very haughty to have to introduce draft resolutions while still going through all the formality of speaking in the third person and things like that. So the director has the power to do things like that and dissolve rules of procedure, which I think is from my point of view, very helpful. But just generally, I would say be aware that your directors are very knowledgeable and have done this for a while, and don't call into question their decisions too easily because there's usually a method to the madness. Okay, important notes. Let's talk about this. The first important note I already mentioned is electronics in committee. We expressly prohibit any sorts of electronics in committee with the exception of unmoderated caucuses. During unmoderated caucuses, you can use laptops to draft working papers or draft resolutions. Again, though, that's at the discretion of the director. If the director feels that laptops are becoming a nuisance and disturbing the workflow in the room, he or she can rule that laptops are no longer going to be allowed in committee at all, even during unmoderated caucuses. The next point I want to go through pertains to voting and attendance. So this is something that is not often taught by Model UN advisors or in Model UN classes, and I think it's a very important thing to know, but a surprisingly little number of people know it. So sometimes during attendance, when you're calling roll at the beginning of any committee session, delegates will say present and voting instead of saying present. And you might wonder to yourself, what does that mean? Is someone just trying to be fancy? And the answer is no, they're not trying to be fancy. Or maybe they are trying to be fancy and they might not know what present and voting means. So present and voting means that if there is a vote on a substantive matter during that committee session, that delegate must vote. So if, say the delegate from Brazil says present and voting during attendance, and at the end of that committee session, we are voting on a draft resolution, and Brazil tries to abstain, we have to redo the voting, because Brazil said at the beginning of the committee session that they will vote. So generally, I encourage delegates when we're doing attendance to say present and not to try to be fancy, but if you do say present in voting, directors are keeping track, and we will hold you to that. We will make sure that you vote during substantive voting. The other thing that pertains to voting is when voting in a roll call vote. So we seldom do roll call votes, but sometimes we do. In fact, the Security Council always does roll call votes, according to HMUN India Rules of Procedure. And so in a roll call vote, you can say yes, you can say no, you can abstain, you can pass, and then we come back to you, or you can say yes with rights or no with rights. And I want to talk about what with rights means. So with rights, some people believe that it's used just for a delegate to give a speech when they're voting. That's not actually the case. With rights is reserved for a very specific example of voting, and it's reserved for when a country is going against its stated national policy. So, for example, say that the United States has a policy of not negotiating with terrorists. That was a long-standing policy in the United States. And all of a sudden, the United States wants to vote yes on a resolution that allows them to negotiate with terrorists. That would be an example of where the United States could say yes with rights, and then at the end of voting, the United States would be given a short period of time to explain why it is voting against a stated national policy. It should not be used, the with rights should not be used just for delegates to get a speech at the end. That's not how it works. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And I also just want to generally talk about points and motions at HMUN India. So if you look in the guide to delegate preparation, there is a list of points and motions. You should be familiar with all of them, and you should also be familiar with the precedents that they take in a committee room. Your directors definitely are. And I want to talk specifically about the points, but before we do that, we're going to do a poll. So if you just give me 1 second, I'm going to copy it over. Just one moment. All right, so here's the poll. Which of the following is not a valid point in HMUN India Rules of Procedure? Point of parliamentary inquiry, point of personal privilege, or point of order? So I'm going to give you guys about 45 seconds or so. Go ahead and vote. And we'll get to discussing this just momentarily. We have about 30 seconds left to vote. Again, which of the following is not a valid point in HMUN India Rules of Procedure? Point of parliamentary inquiry, point of personal privilege, or point of order? About 15 seconds left to vote. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so we're going to stop the polling. All right, this was better than your last poll. So about 56% of you got the right answer, 9 out of the people who voted. And so the correct answer is there's no such thing as a point of inquiry in HMUN India Rules of Procedure. And this is something that the Secretariat and a lot of the directors take very seriously. HMUN India is about debate and compromise and speaking skills and drafting skills, and it's not about showmanship. And oftentimes with conferences that allow points of inquiry, delegates will use a point of inquiry to sort of showcase the facts that they know and try and point out that another delegate is wrong. And to me, I don't really think that's sportsmanlike. And so we don't allow that point because it's not in our rules of procedure. So now I'm going to go through the other 3 points, which are the only 3 valid points in HMUN India Rules of Procedure. So point of parliamentary inquiry is a question or something that a delegate would like to point out about rules of procedure. So if, say you have a question about which motions take precedence over one another, say you have a question about how to introduce an amendment, that would take the form of a point of parliamentary inquiry. So you'd raise your placard, say point of parliamentary inquiry, the director would call on you, you would ask your question, director would either send you a note or answer so that the whole committee could hear. A point of personal privilege is something that affects you as a delegate, as an individual. So, for example, it's too hot in the room, or you can't hear a speaker, or you, I don't know, you would like to sit closer because you can't read the font on the projector, something like that. These points can interrupt a speaker, for example, if you can't hear a speaker, but should be used incredibly sparingly if interrupting someone, just because we don't like to interrupt people. So if you're sitting at the back and you can't hear someone, by all means, you can call a point of personal privilege and ask for the speaker to speak more loudly or for the microphone volume to be turned up. But generally, we ask that you don't interrupt people with a point of personal privilege. The last point that can be made is a point of order, and that's when you believe that parliamentary procedure has been broken. And that can be in the case of a delegate or of the dais. So if you believe that I, as the director, made a mistake, and for example, say I had the committee vote on a moderated caucus when there was an unmoderated caucus also on the table. An unmoderated caucus should be voted before a moderated caucus. So that would be a good time to use a point of order and say, you should have voted on the unmoderated caucus before. You can also use it to vote on, or to call out if you believe that point of parliamentary procedure has been broken in delegate speech. So those are the 3 points that can be made. And that is what I wanted to say about them. But I think the important takeaway is that points of inquiry do not exist. They will not be recognized by directors at HMUN India, and they're not a thing that exists in HMUN India Rules of Procedure. Okay, I have another poll that I would like to do. This one pertains to delegates getting cute with their motions. So let me just put this in. I'm just going to copy and paste the true, false. All right. So the question is, imagine your director is soliciting points and motions. The following motion is in order. Motion for a 10-minute moderated caucus with 45-second speaking time. True or false? You have about 45 seconds. Go for it. I only see 4 votes, but there are many more people watching this webinar, so I'd like to get more people voting. Again, question is, imagine your director is soliciting points and motions. The following motion is in order. Motion for a 10-minute moderated caucus with 45-second speaking time. True or false? You have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. So if you haven't been voting this entire webinar, go ahead and vote. And we will see what the outcome comes to. About 30 seconds left in the voting. About 15 seconds left. I want to see a few more votes. Let's get some more votes in there. There's some people watching who still haven't voted. All right, getting better. Get a few more votes in. Have about 10 seconds left. Alrighty, we're going to stop the voting there. Alright, this is not bad. 47% of you were correct. This motion is not in order. 45 seconds do not go equally into 10 minutes. So speaking times must be in such increments that they fit evenly into total times. This is what I say about delegates trying to get cute, is you'll have someone motion for a 10-minute moderated caucus with 45-second speaking time. That doesn't work. The math doesn't add up. So, don't try and be fancy. Just do motion for the speaking times that you believe are necessary and would be worthwhile to the moderated caucus. So for a 10-minute moderated caucus, you can do either 30-second speaking time or 1-minute speaking time generally. For anything that's in the increment of 3 minutes total, you can do 30 seconds, 45 seconds, or 1 minute speaking time. So directors will also be looking out for that to make sure no one makes that mistake. All right, and we're going to have one final question before we go into the question and answer period. I want to leave about 15 minutes for that if people have questions. And this one pertains to rights of reply. So I have a lot of options for this one, so if you just give me a minute, I need to copy and paste this all from my document. Right of reply is very important. I prefer if it never needs to come up in a debate, but sometimes it does, and as a result, we need to discuss when it's appropriate to be used. So I'm just going to copy this over. If you give me 1 second. Oh no, it won't let me do more than 5 options. I need to do 6. Okay. Okay. All right. When is it appropriate for a delegate to request a right of reply? When the delegate's motion for a moderated caucus did not pass, when the delegate's motion for a moderated caucus was ruled dilatory by the moderator, when a delegate's personal character was called into question, or when a delegate's national identity was impugned, or either 3 or 4, so the last two, before either 3 or 4. So I'll give you guys about another 40 seconds or so. I'd like to get everyone voting. We had a good turnout last time. Even if you don't know, you have a good chance of guessing. Go ahead and guess what you think it might be, and we'll discuss at the end. So let's give you about another 20 seconds or so to vote. Get a few more votes in there. We have a lot more viewers than we have voters. All right, give it another 10 seconds or so, get a few more votes. Alrighty, and we're going to stop the polling there. Great job. So you guys, for the most part, 47% of you, and that's a majority, got it right this time. The correct answer is either 3 or 4. So if a delegate gives a speech that either insults or calls into question the personal character or national identity of another delegate, national identity being the nation they are representing at the conference, the delegate who feels that he or she was offended has the option to submit a right of reply to the director. So right of reply is basically a 30 or 45-second speech that the delegate can give in response to the offending delegate. In order to request a right of reply, a delegate must take a note and detail why he or she feels he was offended, and explain that he or she would like a right of reply and submit that to the director. And if the director rules that that is acceptable, the delegate will be granted 30 or 45 seconds to explain themselves and say why they feel they were offended in front of the rest of the committee. All right, and so with that, I've covered most of the things that I had to cover for today that I wanted to make sure that you guys knew. And so I will stick around live for about another 10 minutes or so to answer any questions that people have. So feel free to stick them in the chat box, and I will answer them. Thank you guys very much. You guys are a quiet bunch today. No questions coming in yet. Maybe my chat is just broken. Let's see if I can get it to work. Alright, I'm going to try to go offline for just a second. I think my chat might be broken. And then I'll come right back on and see if there are any questions. So I'll be right back.